Thank you. The next question is to both of you, and we will start with Mr. Bledsoe. What would be your strategy to make sure Michigan has an educated workforce that is competitive and sustainable in the future?
That was an educated workforce that's competitive?
Competitive and sustainable in the future.
I'd like to talk for a minute about my proposal for a 2-year K through 12 budget with funding set for both years. It's very hard to come up with lots of new dollars for public education these days. We have some pretty tight budgets in Lansing, and that means that there are tight budgets throughout our state in terms of running our public schools. But if we could guarantee funding for our schools, our public schools, over a 2-year period, it would have several positive consequences. In the first place, most of our school districts, including Grosse Pointe, are sitting on substantial fund equity reserves. I think Grosse Pointe has between $15 and $20 million currently in its fund equity reserve. If you ask Grosse Pointe administrators, school administrators, why they have so much money in reserve, they would say that they fear a mid-year budget cut from Lansing. If we can come up with a 2-year K through 12 budget and ensure funding for both years, then they will know exactly how much money to expect and be able to negotiate their contracts
Thank
accordingly.
you. Mrs. DuMouchelle?
I agree that we need a common sense budgeting cycle so teachers and administrators can plan, particularly in tough times like we're having now. But I believe that the school budget has only been cut once, and then it was put back. So there has not been a cut in education budget. Our budget calls for $13 billion in the state budget for K through 12. 80% of that $13 million goes to salaries and benefits. So that leaves 20%, just $2.6 billion out of that $13 billion for the classroom. So I don't feel it's a funding issue at all. It's a accountability issue for what you're doing with the money that you have.
Thank you. The next question is directed to Mrs. DuMouchelle, and you will have 90 seconds. With Michigan undergoing the worst unemployment in the nation and hemorrhaging of thousands of jobs from the collapse of major industry, including automobiles, how will you reduce the tax burden of Michigan industry, as well as the burden of excessive environmental regulations, so as to boost jobs in the state?
Could you repeat that,
Sure.
please?
With Michigan undergoing the worst unemployment in the nation and hemorrhaging of thousands of jobs from the collapse of major industry, including automobiles, how will you reduce the tax burden of Michigan industry, as well as the burden of excessive environmental regulations, so as to boost jobs in this state?
Well, as I said before, the first thing we need to do for businesses is get rid of the MBT and put in a sensible flat tax for corporations. I know that Rick Snyder is espousing a 6%, which would make us very competitive with neighboring states because it would be lower than any neighboring state that we have. But there again, I wanted to return now to Debbie's little plight here about her what she's paying on the SBT or the MBT now. They have 11 employees that are counting on them for their livelihood. They're very generous, but this year it's different. And like everyone else, they're struggling. So we have to do something because 10 families depend on this company. They can't continue on the way they're going. And I encourage that we should have to eliminate that personal property tax. And I also am interested in looking into including economic gardening into the way that we treat businesses in this state. Economic gardening is where you take businesses that are here, you nurture them, you give them all the tools, all of the resources, including less regulation that's onerous and on the backs of them, and make it attractive for them to grow and create jobs so people can stay here and have jobs.
Thank you. Mr. Bledsoe, for 60 seconds, would you like to answer?
Well, clearly, the way to reduce the cost of state government as it's shared by the current population of Michigan and Michigan businesses is to grow the economic pie, to become a more prosperous state so that more people and more businesses are sharing in the cost of our government. And there, I don't think there's a single silver bullet to doing that. We've talked about abolishing the Michigan business tax, and certainly that's one of the keys. Looking at all regulations to see that they're effective and that they're protecting something that's valuable to us. But we also got to think about all the other little things that will make our region and our state more attractive. The first thing that comes to my mind is mass transit. When someone flies into Metro Airport and they discover that the only way to get downtown is by taxi or a limousine, that is a huge problem in terms of overcoming this negative perception of Detroit.
The next question we will start, this is directed to Mr. Bledsoe. You have 90 seconds. It'll probably take me that long to read it. Your party and your governor, Janet Granholm, have refused to encourage and expand existing, tried, and useful forms of nuclear, coal, and petroleum energy for our major power producers, Consumers Power and DTE Energy. Rather, you and the Democrats have pushed highly inefficient, government-subsidized, costly forms of solar wind energy by forcing these power producers to provide 15% of their energy from alternate sources. If reelected, will you work to reverse this dangerous retrograde legislation and rather commit yourself to encouraging not only the replacement of our now 35-year-old nuclear plants, but the doubling or tripling of nuclear power plants by streamlining and expediting the permit process so that replacements and additions can be quickly placed online without exorbitant fees?
There's more?
Wouldn't such widely available cheap energy be a tremendous boost for new and existing industry in Michigan, as well as a source for thousands of productive jobs?
Wow. My answer will be shorter than the question, I suspect. Actually, as a matter of fact, I am a member of the Nuclear Power Caucus in the House of Representatives. I am pro-nuclear power. I think we do have to explore alternatives to coal and petroleum products, and nuclear power impresses me as a viable alternative that we've been overly shy about since some of the accidents have occurred at various places, 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. But the technology has come a long way since those plants had those accidents. And the French have embraced nuclear power, and nuclear power now provides more than 20% of all electricity in France. And so we in Michigan, I think, should be leaders in developing nuclear power. And so that's an answer to one part of the question, but it's a very long question.
Thank you. Do you want me to read more, or are you you're all
I'll
set?
leave it at
Okay, thank you. Mrs. DuMouchelle, would you care to comment?
Well, I agree with Mr. Bledsoe that nuclear power is a way to go, but I also believe that it's 70% that France is producing. Actually, they're producing so much power over there, they're selling it off to England. It goes through the channel. They have a track that goes through the channel with power to England. And also, nuclear power has become much more safe than anyone ever thought, years ago when we had that accident at 3 Mile Island. You can even take the rods, the fuel rods, which we now dispose of in some facility, but you can take those and you can recycle those, because I'm into recycling anything that we can recycle, and you can use those for, it goes into medical devices, et cetera. So there's a lot of good that can come out of nuclear power.
Thank you. The next question, we will start with Mrs. DuMouchelle. What do you think the effect of term limits has done to the quality of state government?
Well, I have too many papers up here. Years ago, the voters decided that we were going to have term limits in this state. Now, I come from the real world of business. Usually takes about 6 months or so to have enough time to assess the situation, the players, and get into the rhythm of whatever the business is. In 6 years, if you have the backbone, you can change Michigan into a job creation culture once again, to have people clamoring to get in rather than get out. You know, in the past 10 years, half of all of the job losses in this country came from Michigan. We lost 250,000 jobs in 2009 alone. The legislature, I believe, should work on getting Michigan workers back to work and not worry about their own jobs. I will know what my priorities are from day one if you hire me and send me to Lansing. That will be to create jobs and cut spending.
Thank you. Mr. Bledsoe.
Well, I'm a leader in the effort to reform term limits. It was almost 20 years ago that the voters in Michigan adopted what are the most draconian term limits in the country. We're allowed to serve up to 3 terms or 6 years in the House of Representatives, and then we're banned from additional service, and it's a lifetime ban on legislative service. There's also an opportunity to serve 2 terms or 8 years in the Senate, and then you have a lifetime ban on additional service in the Senate. My proposal, and I have about 27 co-sponsors, equally numbering Democrats and Republicans, all freshmen on this proposal, would combine those 2 limits so that a person can serve up to 14 years in the legislature, and then they would be termed out of the legislature and they would not be allowed to return. This would greatly enhance the amount of experience that we have in our state government. What if we had, sorry.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Bledsoe. It's for both of you for 60 seconds. What programs would you cut to reduce Michigan taxes?
I beg your pardon?
What programs would you cut to reduce Michigan taxes?
You know, the place that I would look first in terms of saving money in state government would be to our corrections budget. We incarcerate more people in the state of Michigan than any other state in the Midwest by far. If we incarcerated at the same rate as they do in Indiana or Illinois, we would save about $1 billion a year. And so, you know, as someone explained to me one time, you know, there are 2 kinds of people that we keep locked up. They're the people that we're afraid of and the people that we're just mad at. Well, the people that we're afraid of, those people need to stay locked up. But if we're just mad at them, maybe we shouldn't spend $30,000 to $35,000 a year keeping them in prison.
Thank you. Mrs. DuMouchelle?
Well, I agree with Tim that, and I had mentioned it already, that the Department of Corrections is an area that we can look at to really cut. But let's think about our spending spree that we're having in Lansing right now. I understand that 2 weeks ago, the HHS budget, the Health and Human Services budget, was just voted on, and the Democrats voted to increase that budget by $1 billion. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that the state is not flush with cash. We don't have an extra $1 billion. In a department where the Auditor General report said that the past year there was $450 million that was either wasted or fraudulently spent. So if we're going to increase the budget by $1 billion, don't you think we should look and find out where it's the mismanagement of the funds and the fraudulent spending of the funds were initially?